Okay, so as you know, our topic for the presentation is implementation of international law. Next slide. So we have divided our top presentation in three parts. I would be covering the introduction and role of judiciary and constitution in implementing the international law, whereas Chetna would be covering implementation in India and challenges in implementation, and finally Arushi would be concluding with solution for better implementation and a comparative study. Next slide, please. Now, moving forward with introduction, let's start with something basic. Now, what is international law? International law has been defined by many great jurists, and Ophium is one of them. And he defined international law as a body of customary and conventional rules which are considered legally binding by civilized states in their relation with each other within a community which, by common consent of this community, shall be enforced by external power. So I think we can say in a way that international law is a body of rules and principles which regulates the conduct and relations of members of international community. Now, we have to look at the fact that opium's definition is considered to be traditional definition of international law. So, in modern viewpoint, we can say that international law not only regulates the relationship between states but also international organizations, individuals, non-state entities, etc. Now, before going forward to difference between international law and municipal law, we must know what is municipal law. So, municipal law is basically national, domestic, or international law of a sovereign state defined in opposition of international law. So, talking about the difference, I think the major difference between international law and municipal law is that international law is largely concerned with relation among states, whereas municipal law controls the relation between the individuals within the state and between individuals and the state. Now, the question comes as to why should we implement international law? There are many answers and reasons for it, but the most basic reason would be that the most of the states are changing from independent states to an interdependent state. So international law helps in smooth relationship between the states, and moreover, the status of international law is changing from a weak, that is unenforceable law, to a strong enforceable law. So every state is required to follow them. Next slide, Arushi. Okay. Constitution and rule of judiciary. Now, our Indian Constitution, in its various parts, laid down several provisions with respect to international law, like Article 51, Article 73, and Article 253. Now, I would be covering these three articles majorly in this presentation. So, first, Article 51. Now, in this article, it basically this article says that the state has the responsibility to promote international peace and security in the nation and maintain just and just and honorable relations with the other nations. Now, in the case of Keshav Nanda Bharati versus State of Kerala, Justice Sikri said where the language of municipal law is vague or contrary, then the court must look at the parent international authority of that particular international law. Similarly, in case of Krishna Sharma versus State of West Bengal, the Calcutta High Court held that when there is a dispute between municipal and international law, the court shall make a harmonious construction between the two laws. Now, Article 73. Now, according to this article, the executive power of union is extended to all the matters with respect to which Parliament has the power to make laws by the virtue of any treaty or agreement. So we can basically say that according to Article 73, the Constitution puts no restriction on the power of an executive with relation to international law. This allows the executives to enter into any type of treaty obligation. And lastly, Article 253. Now, according to this article, the Parliament has the sole right to make laws for the whole or any part of India with motive of implementing any international treaties, agreement, or conventions with other countries, or any decisions made at any association or conference. Now, Indian judiciary and international law. Our Indian judiciary does not have power to make laws, but it interprets the obligation of India in international law by adjudicating domestic cases concerning issues of international law. So we can say that India's outlook towards international law from two points of view. First, Indian law vis-a-vis treaties. Now, as we know, treaties are considered to be self-executing unless and until there is a requirement of an amendment to the constitution or any existing municipal law. Therefore, the most frequent question asked in front of the Indian courts is whether such treaties are binding automatically or they require any enabling legislation. So, in the case of Vaishakha versus State of Rajasthan, the court, while drafting the guidelines on sexual harassment of women at the workplace, referred to many international conventions and norms which were relevant. Similarly, in case of Nilbati Behra versus State of Orissa, the court relied on Article 9, Clause 5 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights while granting compensation to victims of custodial death. So, from these stated cases, we can say that court has the liberty to apply the treaties to domestic law provisions if they are not inconsistent with the existing municipal law. And finally, Indian law vis-a-vis international customary law. The Indian judiciary does not consider customary laws of international customary rules of international law as part of municipal law automatically. Therefore, where there is a conflict between municipal law and customary law, the formal will prevail. So that was only my part. Rest would be explained by Chetna. Over to you, Chetna.
Thank you, Anjali. Next topic I'll be covering is implementation of international laws in India. Here we will see various branches of international law and their implementation in India. First one is human rights. Well, we know fundamental rights under the Indian Constitution and the international humanitarian law contain similar principles and values. Developments in international law have paved way to various human rights legislations in India. A greater role is being played by the judiciary in developing human rights jurisprudence in India based on these international principles. We can see special legislations and provisions which can throw some light upon how human rights are are being implemented in India through these legislations, which are the Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act, the Mental Act, the Human Rights Act, and so on. Next is environmental laws. The steep rise in global temperature and the growing realization that natural resources, both living and non living, are finite, created a global concern for the protection and conservation of environment. To address this concern, the world met at Stockholm in 1972 in what has come to be known as the First Earth Summit. India was an active participant to this conference, and since then is committed to the cause of environmental conversation. And after this conference, India implemented several laws related to environment, which are water prevention and control. Excuse me, Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981, and Environmental Protection Act. Well, the scope of right of life under Article 21 of the Constitution has been widened through the concept of PIL, and clean environment is now a fundamental right of every Indian. Thus, the impact of international law on India's environmental law, similar to that on human rights, is profound and has been highly beneficial. Then is trade laws. In order to institutionalize international trade regulations, International Trade Organization, that is ITO, was sought to be established. But the ITO could not materialize due to wide differences among the nations. As a stopgap arrangement, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, that is GATT, was signed. The GATT did not include trade and services and was replaced by the World Trade Organization, which included two important aspects of: first, the General Agreement on Trade and Services, and second, the trade related aspects of intellectual property rights. It is stringent enforcement mechanism, and the regulations have been accepted unconditionally and in full. India has implemented its obligations under the WTO, which include regulation on tariffs and taxes, anti-dumping, and intellectual property rights. through various special provisions and legislations, which are the Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act, the Special Economic Zones Act 2005, the Special Economic Zones Rules 2006, and so on. Well, the list is so long. Then is intellectual property rights. The intellectual property rights system in India is based on the developments in international law. India is a member of the World Intellectual Property Organization and party to the World Trade Organization as well. Managed agreement on trade related aspects of international property rights. Therefore, India has brought its domestic law in harmony with the international IPR regime. The legislations in this regard include the Patent Act, the Copyright Act, the Trademarks Act, and the Design Act, and etc. Then is alternate dispute resolution. India enacted the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996 in order to bring uniform rules regarding settling commercial disputes based on the model law of international commercial arbitration and conciliation rules adopted by the UN Commission on International Trade Law. Amendments to the Code of Civil Procedure were also made. Then is space law. In 1959, the UN Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space was established in order to create a specialized agency for dealing with the peaceful use of outer space and promote international cooperation. India is one of its members but does not have any domestic law regarding it. Then is cyber law. Cyber law in is India, governed by the Information Technology Act 2000. This legislation was enacted subsequent to the unilateral model law on electronic commerce, that is e-commerce. The various legislations passed in this regards include the Information Technology Act and amendments to Indian Evidence Act. Uh, Arushi, can you please next? Thank you so much. Then is challenges to the implementation of international rules. First is politics and power struggle in international law. The interplay of politics in the international arena, as well as the quest for power by states in the international system, is an undisputed phenomena that cannot be ruled out if one is making an analysis of factors that hinder the effectiveness of international law in recent times. The differences in ideology between the states have made the practice and application of international law difficult to reach a consensus between the members to respond to situations of emergency. In other words, veto from one member implies that a resolution cannot be adopted. Matters of urgency are delayed in most cases before a consensus is reached among the rest of the members. Then is double standards and unilateral decisions. The fact that when rich and powerful states occasionally breach one international law or the other without being held accountable for their actions, this phenomena creates a situation where a weak and poor countries tend to believe that international law does not exist to serve their common good and that international law is a tool developed by the West or powerful countries to serve their own common agenda and the interest and probably use it to exploit the weak and poor countries. For example, most countries sometimes refuse to accept refugees in their territory. And if they accept, they fail to implement the rights and privileges that refugees are supposed to enjoy in their host country. In addition, unilateral decisions that some countries usually take with regards to issues of international global concerns usually serves as a very heavy challenge to implementing key internationally agreed proposals and resolutions. This, in fact, affects effective implementation of international law. Then are non-state actors. There is a rapid emergence of non-state actors in the contemporary legal and political world. Since non-state actors are not privy to the international laws governing them, and the issue of denial of consent and participation in rulemaking raises a question mark that these non-state actors will abide by the standards which they have not consented to and participated in its formulation. This thus possesses a challenge on enforcing the international laws. Then is excessive self-preservation. Laws such as Sri Lanka's Prevention of Terrorism Act of 1979, with the broad powers it provides to law enforcement agents and the guarantee of immunity if they are deemed to be acting in good faith, have over the years undermined IHL, that is international humanitarian laws. The most gross human rights violations and serious violations of IHL, such as disappearances, extrajudicial killings, war crimes, etc., are not criminalized as offences under Sri Lankan Domestic Act. With this, I end my topic and I would like Arushi to continue.
Thanks, Chetna. So now I'll start with what are the solutions for better implementation of international law. So before starting with what the solutions are, the question is, why do we need solutions for better implementation? Why isn't the present scenario by which the other countries are implementing international law, why is it not sufficient? So international law is so dynamic and it is changing rapidly. It is developing so fast that there is a need for better application of international law to maintain the security and the peace within the world. So coming further to the solutions, first is applying existing laws as written in the constitution law and the treaty law. By this, I mean that the principle of pacta sunt servanda should be followed with utmost seriousness, that is enshrined under Article 26 of the Vienna Convention, which says that every treaty in force is binding upon the parties to it and must be performed by them in good faith. So all the treaties that have been accepted or contracted between the parties, they must be fulfilled in good faith. But this principle is not followed very seriously in all the countries. For example, I mean, we are talking about India. So we say that in India, even in the previous sites, Anjali and Chetna have introduced that in India, we do not follow international law with utmost seriousness, or we can say that domestic law is given more preference over the international law. So by this, I mean that there can be a check in advance to ensure that there is no the laws in India, that is the domestic laws and the international laws, are consistent with each other. Before signing the treaty, the country can basically check whether the domestic laws are not being violated by any of the part of the treaty, and they can try to keep international law and municipal law equal rather than giving one preference over the other. And in the case of dispute, courts give more preference to municipal laws, and this can be abolished or this can be reduced. To support my argument, I have a case law. It is a landmark case, which is Jolly George Verghese versus Bank of Cochin. So I'll explain in short the facts of the case. So in this case, the Bank of Cochin was a decree holder and Jolly George Verghese was the judgment debtor. He was the judgment debtor, that is Jolly George Verghese. He broke the contractual relationship and he was liable to pay rupees 7 lakhs to the Bank of Cochin. And he did not pay it. His properties were attached, but at the same time, there was an order of civil arrest of the judgment debtor under Section 51, Order 21, and Rule 37 of Code of Civil Procedure. So the question came that from international law perspective, whether it was justified to imprison a person merely for the failure to perform a contractual obligation or not. So in this case, the Justice Krishna Iyer said that until the municipal law is changed to accommodate the treaty, what binds the court is the former, not the latter, thereby meaning that in case of a dispute, if the international law and municipal law are contrary to each other, the law binding in India would be municipal law and not international law. Thus, it shows that in India, a preference is given to municipal law over international law, and this can be reduced if there are no dispute between both the laws by checking in advance if there is anything wrong or any law in the treaty which violates the municipal law. Now, coming further is citing international law more often. So we all know that in India, judges, I mean, we can say judgment set the precedent and judges judges interpret law, sorry. So while giving a judgment, judges usually cite or refer to articles or sections which are being violated or which are providing the person right. So we have studied earlier, we have read earlier that human right laws and fundamental rights, they are more or less overlapping and they are some or the other way related to each other. There are many fundamental rights which are also human right laws. So what a practice can be changed is that while giving a judgment, the judges can also write or refer to human rights if there is a simultaneous violation of a fundamental right. By this I mean that if there is a violation of our right to life and personal liberty under Article 21, and if one of the human right laws also talks about same right, in that case the judgment can mention both of them. It might give a proper exposure to common man, to advocates, and to other and the entire country in one or the other way. It gives a better picture of international law and international law. Yeah, the third is new legal document. By this I mean that the country or the government can constitute committees to review problems in implementation of international law. Before signing a treaty, there is a lot of discussion which takes place, but at the same time there can be committees which can be set up after the treaty has been accepted by our country or contracted by our country. The committee can study the shortcomings of the treaty, or they can study what can be changed in our constitution, our laws, which will help the better implementation of international law, better implementation of the treaty which has been signed. So these are some of the solutions which will help in better implementation of international law. Now,
Arushi?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm so sorry, I got a call in between. Are you ended with your presentation?
No, ma'am.
Okay, fine. You can't continue, please.
Do you want me to explain something again?
Yes, please. The last 5-10 minutes, the time when you were starting from, you were talking about the concept of, international law and the concept of municipal law.
Sorry, ma'am, your voice is breaking.
That, India.
Ma'am, your voice is breaking. I can't hear you. Oh, ma'am.
Are you able to hear me? Rest, please tell me.
Yes, ma'am, now it's fine.
Okay.
Ma'am, can you please repeat from where should I start again?
I was saying that I was till the time when you were talking about you were emphasizing on India. India is emphasized or is emphasizing more on municipal law more than international law. And post that, I got a call from Shishma ma'am. So yes, you can.
Ma'am, did you hear the Jolly George Verghese case on Bank of Cochin?
No.
Okay.
No.
I'll start again. No problem. So I was saying that in India, we give more preference to international law and give more preference to municipal law as compared to international law. And to support my argument, I just discussed a case that is Jolly George Verghese versus Bank of Cochin. So in this case, what happened was a Bank of Cochin was the decree holder and Jolly George Verghese was the judgment debtor. In this case, the judgment debtor breached or violated the terms of the contract. Terms of the contract, and he was liable to pay rupees 7 lakhs to the decree holder. He did not pay it. He did not pay it, and there was an order by the court of a civil imprisonment under section 51, order 21, and rule 37 of the Code of Civil Procedure. So the question arose that from international law perspective, whether it was justified to imprison a person merely for failure to perform a contractual obligation, which means that in case, from the international perspective, whether it is allowed or it is valid to arrest a person for a civil violation of rights. So in this case, Justice Krishna Iyer held that until the municipal law is changed to accommodate the treaty, what binds the court is the former, not the latter. Thereby, the courts gave more preference to international law and more preference to municipal law as compared to international law. Coming further, they're citing international law more often. By this, I mean that judges, while delivering the judgment, can also incorporate the international law, which is same or which is equal to domestic law. For example, we have read about the human rights. So what we can do is, if a judgment, if a human right is same or is in parallel lines to the fundamental rights, while delivering a judgment, the judge can also incorporate or mention the fundamental right along with human rights. Thereby, it would give more exposure to international laws, and it would give more knowledge to normal people as well as advocates, and it would give them a better understanding of what international laws are. Thirdly, new legal document. By this, I mean that new committees can be set up to review the shortcomings of a treaty, which means that before contracting a treaty, there is a lot of discussion which takes place. But after the treaty is signed, for its implementation and to resolve the dispute which arise because of the treaty, they can also be studied by these committees. These committees can include the retired judges or even present judges, academicians, or anyone which understands the importance and which understands the need for international law. So these are some of the solutions for better implementation of international law. Now coming further, there is a comparative study of how international law is implemented in India versus how international law is implemented in other countries. To understand this, I would first discuss two theories which are the basis of the comparison: dualist theory and monist theory. So what all we have discussed in our presentation, it is clear that in India, we do not take international law and municipal law on equal footing. International law and municipal law are two different or two separate entities. So I would request you all to focus on the last picture here, which talks about monist theory and dualist theory. In this, you can see that in dualist theory, international law and municipal law are in two different circles, and in monist theory, international law and municipal law overlap each other. So this picture makes the topic very much clear, but at the same time, I will explain it more. So in dualist theory, the dualist theory was explained or was developed by a prominent journal scholar, that was Trypal, in the year 1899. And according to this theory, international law and municipal laws of the several states are two distinct, separate, and self-contained legal systems. And if we talk about monist theory, this theory was pronounced in the 18th century, and it was put forward by two German scholars, that is Moser and Martins. And according to this theory, municipal law as well as international law are parts of one universal legal system serving the needs of human community in one way or the other. So by this we mean that the countries which follow the monist theory keep international law and municipal law to a certain level at equal footing, and in dualist theory, these two are totally different things. We need to have municipal law which will further implement or give a right to implement those in their own country. So if we talk about the states which I have written, United Kingdom and Canada, these two follow the dualist theory, that is same as India. And if we talk about USA and France, these follow the monist theory. So monist theory, by this, I don't mean that they, as in when a country signs the treaty, it is implemented there and then. No, there is some kind of legislative approval required for some kind of treaties, but at the same time, they are kept in equal footing to municipal law. But in the dualist theory, no treaties have formal status of law in the domestic legal system unless the legislature approves it. As and when the legislature will approve it, Anjali discussed it earlier in a slide, Article 253. So our parliament also have a power to enforce or implement international law by passing another law. So unless unless a consent is given to implementation of treaties, these rights are not enforced directly in India, or they do not incorporate the treaty into domestic laws. That is all from our side. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Fine. I was there to. I was there throughout. Maybe one suggestion. At a time, it was sounding as if the group members were. It's a news reading session, and you're reading news. तो बीच में मुझे ऐसा लग रहा था कि it has become like that. You will have to make sure that it doesn't sound like that you're reading. You have to be you have to be very what can I say? Like, I'm tired of saying this, but still, fine. Rest the presentation was fine. You majorly covered every possible thing. That is not a problem. Okay, you did a good task. The only thing, one question I wanted to ask: do you think the implementation of municipal law in India, implementation of, there must be countries who specify more on international basis, international laws more than domestic laws. If you compare those countries with, if you compare those countries with the countries who emphasize more on municipal law, what would you be thinking that what holds a better stand, whether emphasizing more on, relying more on municipal law is better, or relying more on international law is better? What do you think?
Ma'am, I think that both of them are very different in their own spheres. The countries which are following international law with more seriousness are also performing, they are also performing very well in the international or domestic spheres, and as well as the countries which are performing, which keep domestic law over the international law. So I think I won't say that there is some kind of a betterment, or there's some kind of
implementation.
Sorry, ma'am?
In terms of implementation of, like, what has a better what has a better governance, whether international law or municipal law has better governance?
Ma'am, I think when an international law is being implemented by the way of domestic law, it becomes easy for a country to implement the international law in its actual sense, because they are inculcating that the very essence of international law into their domestic laws to actually implement and enforce that international law, to make it in practice. So I think on the question of governance, both the countries, I guess, are doing their part, which they think are will better reconcile with their present situation. As in, if they are emphasizing more on domestic law, then I guess they must be actually be inculcating that international law into their domestic law to actually give it a very effective way to implement that. And if they are emphasizing more on international law, then they may be or may not be reconciling their domestic law with their with the international law, basically reducing the contradiction between the two. So the both the scenarios are really very different, but when it comes to the practicability part, I guess both are doing really very fine to not contradict or to reduce the conflict between the two laws.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Fine. One more question. Um, how do we implement? What is the step of implementation of international law into municipal law in India?
Ma'am, by way of legislation, as I discussed earlier, like we implemented various branches of laws through special legislations. As Anjali emphasized on Article 256, we can implement laws related to those conferences and treaties. So there are many, like the list is so long that we cover human rights, we cover environmental laws and trade laws. There are many various branches of laws through legislations we implement them.
And then not only by the help of Article 253, but with the help of judiciary also. Like I have discussed various cases. In those cases,
Right.
then municipal law falls law. In that cases, international law comes. So yeah, with that conventions and all, if judiciary tries to implement them, then in a way international law is applied or
Okay.
implemented
Right.
in.
Yeah, yes. Anjali clearly talked about how Indian judiciary contributed in the aspect of in implementation of international beautifully. Right, right. I was here. Fine, fine. Thank you so much for the. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think you did a good job. Right.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
ma'am.
It actually gave us the opportunity to understand the practicability of the topic. Thank you.
Even one of the merit with you guys were that you were able to connect those two laws together. So that's the best thing ever. I mean, it's also very important. It's because otherwise, one specific topic, and if you do a presentation on one specific topic, you'll be restricted. But now, you cater to the need, or you studied more about what is international law, what is municipal law, how to combine. It would help. I mean, like presenting on this topic would eventually help you to understand the practical scenarios on how you implement an international law in Indian scenario. Okay, thank you so much. I also expected that you would also give an example of certain other countries like Russia, Australia, right?
Ma'am, I did cover it in the comparative study.
Yes. Yes, you did, but couple of more with respect to their with respect to their legislation also. You did cover, but a little more.
Okay.
Like, for example, I would give you an example of Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is an act prevalent in UK with respect to companies and all that matter, companies and corporate affair. It has come into existence because of a international convention with regard to finance and with regard to corporate affairs. So how have they implemented that? But they haven't implemented the whole act. It's in which it has been a part of it. So now maybe example of certain laws on how is it different from the main parent law, and how, like, whether it has been a total implementation or maybe a partial implementation. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, can I stop
Fine.
recording now?
Yes, please stop recording and you can mail me this.
Ma'am, I'll add it to
Antha,
the drive which
link.
I think
Yes.
Shivangi created it.
Yes, you will be able to